Los Angeles is famous for its sound stages, but LA Mayor Karen Bass has recently described the city more as a petri dish for the Trump administration and its agenda. The National Guard deployment here was one of several major challenges facing her own administration. Mayor Karen Bass joins me now to talk about them and so much more. Mayor Bass, thank you so much for coming in. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We talk about these issues every single night. No one better to talk about them than with you. But you chose a really uninteresting time to be mayor. Not a lot going on.
Not much happening.
As we talk about these issues, we also talk to these charter reform experts who say, look, it's not a strong mayor city, not personal to you, as compared to New York and Chicago, intentionally founded to be as such. But you're sitting here, you understand the power and the responsibility of being mayor in Los Angeles. How do you view the position in terms of power and context and accountability?
Well, I don't think that I would love to have more power. Of course, I think anybody would. But I think it's a question as to how you use your power. There's a lot of ways of using power. And so I'm fine with the system that we have. However, I am looking forward to charter reform because there are some things that we need to fix in our system. And we do have roadblocks that are because of restrictions connected to the charter.
The charter reform is an interesting conversation. There's
Yes.
a panel now of 13 members who are discussing this. And some of the things that they're talking about are ranked choice voting, expanding the size of the city council. What are some of the reforms that you'd like to see come forward?
Well, one of the things is the city's hiring process. So one of my priorities has been to increase the number of police officers that we have. For a city of 3.8 million people, we actually have a small force, and we're getting ready to have all of these major events in our town.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned about that. But the civil service process needs to be updated, and that impacts hiring no matter what you're trying to come on the city for, but in particular law enforcement. So but the other thing is the city's infrastructure. I would like to see the infrastructure process taken away from elected officials, maybe an independent entity. Everybody complains about the state of our sidewalks, potholes, all of that, and it takes a very long time to get it done. And I think if it's separated from term restricted elected officials and an independent operation manages it, we might be able to have better repairs of our city's infrastructure.
Well, it's interesting as you bring up these issues with law enforcement and infrastructure. A few of the things that have been brought up in recent weeks and months with the interesting relationship right now, let's call it that, between the city and the federal government. Obviously, the ICE raids, so much more has come to your doorstep over the course of this. How do you view this present moment right now between the federal government and Los Angeles?
Well, I think it's actually a very dangerous moment. It is historic. For the first time in 250 years, we have a president who does not adhere to following the rule of law. For example, a temporary restraining order was imposed on the city, was imposed on the federal government from ICE randomly snatching people off the street in what appears to be kidnappings, and one would argue they actually are, or chasing people through Home Depot parking lots, randomly, in my opinion, hunting down people who look Latino, who you hear Spanish language being spoken. And so the federal government was told not to do that anymore, but they're doing it anyway. So it's a terrible overreach of federal power. And now we see the federal government using it in other ways in other cities to go after crime, to go after homelessness.
And on that front, you've been on Zoom calls, as you've said, with mayors from other cities, and they're watching Los Angeles. You've called Los Angeles a petri dish, a sort of testing ground. What are you talking to these mayors about? How are you describing what we're seeing here and how they should prepare?
Well, in both cities, I've spoken to both mayors recently, Mayor Bowser as well as Mayor Johnson in Chicago, and Mayor Lee in Oakland, talking about how we are going to respond to this federal overreach. I did describe Los Angeles as being a petri dish because I do believe that Los Angeles was the first experiment. Washington, D.C. was number 2. Chicago is next. And in my opinion, this is a way of getting the American public to accept military intervention on our streets, because after a while it becomes normalized and people aren't surprised to see soldiers on the streets. This is terrible because our military is not trained to do crowd control our crime intervention. It is a misuse of our troops. It's extremely inappropriate, and I would question whether or not it's a violation of our Constitution.
A huge conversation. There's been multiple lawsuits now between the city of Los Angeles and the Trump administration, one of which you were named a defendant as well, litigating the so-called sanctuary status of Los Angeles. For the folks at home to understand, not just that this is politically popular to be a sanctuary city, which is to say not facilitate these federal immigration enforcements, but also some folks wonder about the cost of being a sanctuary city. Talk about that.
The cost of being a sanctuary city?
The cost of being a sanctuary city in the terms of the federal government withholding federal funds. And there have been lawsuits on this, but just for you to discuss for those people at home.
Well, first of all, let me just say that we know we are a city of immigrants. We have sectors of our economy that cannot function without immigrant labor. And so in order for Los Angeles to run, in order for there to be construction workers, hospitality workers, our fashion district is a ghost town now with 4,000 independent businesses, restaurants, closing. In order for that to happen, we have to make sure that we protect all of our residents. And so I look at the costs the other way. I know the federal government have threatened to withhold resources. However, the court recently ruled that the federal government can't do that. The question will be, will the government follow the law? Will this administration follow the rule of law? That is a question that has never been asked before in our 250-year history.
And that's absolutely true. I've spoken with California Attorney General Rob Bonta, who's been behind some of these lawsuits, about the fact that the Supreme Court, which has been appointed majorly by conservative presidents, will follow through on some of these questions. By Trump, a few of them. It's very interesting because we think about June 6th was the beginning of these ICE raids. We think back to January 7th when LA engulfed in flames. Impossible to just even conceive of what that meant for all of us in so many different ways. And now we are on to the rebuild.
That's right.
There's been much to celebrate from the governor, from yourself, about the speed with which the debris had been removed. And now we are at about 300 residences that have had their permits approved in the Palisades Fire area. That's under city jurisdiction. Again, the diffuse power structure of Los Angeles can be confusing to people. But still, 300 people. Think about there are possibly thousands who want to have their permits approved and to move forward. Talk about the speed with which we're seeing this rebuilding.
Sure, but first of all, let me just say that if you've lost your home, for me to talk about and celebrate the speed, that's not a lot of comfort there, because you're still out of your home. Now, having said that, I am proud of the progress. I'm proud the fact that there's 55 homes that are under construction right now in the Palisades. As you've mentioned, more than 300 homes have their permits approved, and they are given the green light to rebuild. We have about 1,000 permits that are working their way through the process. We're trying to do everything we can to expedite it. So I set up a one-stop rebuilding center where all of the city departments are in one physical location. But it's a work in progress. It's a pilot program. When we hear of glitches, when we hear of people that are getting stuck in one part of the process or another, we address that immediately. So we maintain an open, regular dialogue with the residents of the Palisades so that they keep us informed as to how the process is working, where improvements are needed. But if you look at what is going on in the Palisades and you compare it to other major wildfires, we're way, way, way ahead, months ahead. And that's what's ironic about the federal overreach, because the administration deployed a record number of Army Corps of Engineers to the Palisades, to the other fire-impacted areas, and that's why the debris was removed so quickly. In just a day or so, we are going to conclude. The Army Corps of Engineers is wrapping up their mission here because all of the lots have been cleared at this point.
That is a huge milestone to discuss. And as you say, celebration is a relative term with all of this.
That's right.
And it's a conversation then about inventory for housing, for people to be able to live in places that maybe they once had, and for others to find new places to live. We're going to take a commercial break. If you'll stick around, talk a little bit more about this on the other side of the break. We'll be right back with Mayor Karen Bass. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Inside the Issues and our conversation with Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, who joins me here in studio. Mayor Bass, as we talk about the fire rebuild and we talk about the fact that this would potentially mean, obviously, for people to get these houses under construction, to be able to move back in, there's just a huge conversation around housing in Southern California and in California. And there's a huge conversation around something called SB 79, the Senate bill that would upzone areas that are within a quarter-mile of metro and transit stops to try and create some housing density and address one of these issues, which is a lack of inventory. We did see LA City Council narrowly vote to basically say that they oppose that Senate bill, not binding, but basically a recommendation, and you signed it.
Yes.
You said you opposed it as well. Talk about why.
Yes. You know, first of all, we need so much housing built on every level. We especially need affordable housing, workforce housing. What is really sad is that you raise your kids, they go to college, and they're raised here, and then they can't afford to live where they grew up. And so we need housing of all varieties, and obviously we need housing to address homelessness. But I do think it's important as to how you get the housing built. And one thing that drives neighborhood crazy is when you force it on a neighborhood. And I believe that the best way to do it is to do it in conjunction with the neighbors. For example, there's some neighborhoods that do not want multifamily on their block where they're single family homes, but they're very supportive of housing being built on the commercial corridor. That's a way to upzone, but to upzone in a way that the neighborhood supports.
Well, there's this conversation also about the fact that this would just address an issue where we don't have enough places. What do you say to those people who say it's just not working, and this idea of local control versus state control is just really local officials wanting to hold on to power to the extent they can?
Oh, I do believe that you need state intervention sometime. I mean, I served on the state level, so I have a lot of empathy to that. But you can also do an overreach with that as well. And so again, I think the best way to build housing is to build a consensus with the neighborhood support. I also want to look at building a lot, especially in regard to people who are unhoused, on publicly owned land. Every branch of government has publicly owned land in the city of Los Angeles, including LA Unified School District. And so looking at building a lot of different types of housing on land that would be easier to acquire.
The conversation about housing is so important, especially because we know that homelessness remains an issue.
Right.
You, on day one, declare an emergency on
Yes.
homelessness. And in the last 2 years, there's been some positive movement. These point-in-time counts come from LAHSA, which is another kettle of fish to discuss. But talk about the wins and the challenges first and foremost.
Sure. Well, first of all, I did come into office and declare a state of emergency because to me, to have over 40,000 Angelenos living on the street, 5 of them will not wake up tomorrow morning because that is the death rate of people on the street, is something that we have raised an entire generation that has never seen anything different. Los Angeles and no other city should have people on the street in the richest country in the history of the world. And so addressing street homelessness was my #1 priority, and we have proved that people will leave the street. So I'm proud of the fact that for 2 years in a row, street homelessness is down, and it's not all about the point-in-time count. You have the RAND Corporation that also confirmed that data, as well as USC. So there's 3 confirmations that street homelessness is down 2 years in a row. Now, we have a lot of problems with it. It is a system that is broken. In my opinion, it was never designed to end homelessness. It was only designed to manage homelessness. And I guess public officials expected that it was just going to resolve itself. So we have to have a comprehensive system. But one of the most important parts of a comprehensive system is to prevent people from falling into the streets to begin with. So we have a group, the Mayor's Fund, where we are focusing on eviction prevention. We know because of actions that the City Council has taken, we know people who are facing eviction. We're working with them so they don't fall into homelessness in the first place.
You know, people who are newly homeless go to LAHSA to get some services. And just recently, LAHSA has been instructing its employees on how to let people down easily because saying we don't have enough money to actually help people. A lot of this is from the cuts from the state government. But there's an ongoing conversation with LAHSA, which is a joint city-county, well, it was once a joint city-county, which would provide some of these services to those independent vendors who would then get people the help that they need. However, now the county is pulling its money out after some audits showed that LAHSA is not tracking their funds properly. From a city level, you're exploring now doing the same, setting up a service authority on a city level. Councilmember Nithya Raman, chair of the budget, the Housing Committee, said, you know, I don't think the city is equipped to do this. How do you feel?
Well, first of all, I join her in support of having a bureau within the housing department. I don't support the idea of an independent department because let me just say, how many bureaucracies intentionally go out of business? So my concern is that if we set up a department, then it's going to keep perpetuating itself rather than a bureau inside a existing bureaucracy. So I want to see that happen. we're going to have to face the reality in the city of Los Angeles that we are going to have to take on more. But I do think that there are creative ways for us to make sure that services are provided, to continue, obviously, our relationship with the county, but to do it in some different creative ways.
I mean, there's so much to talk about with the budget. Inside Safe, your signature program, which has helped, people credit that to helping with the numbers, but the sustainability of it, because it costs a lot of money to get people into their
Absolutely, and I agree with her 100%. We've gotten people off the streets into motel rooms, but now we have to look for more cost-effective ways of doing that. So we're coming up with a different type of contracts with the motels so that they're cheaper, but we also need to have a system of long-term interim housing. That's something New York did that we didn't do because we did not prioritize ending street homelessness. We basically were saying, stay on the street until we build you something. That's completely unacceptable because it's unacceptable to have people on our streets. We have to get people housed.
And we know it costs so much money, and that brings up the city budget, which was in a tough spot.
Yes.
The revenues were not there. Lots of headwinds, obviously. We talked about the federal funding freezes and beyond, also just from what we saw from the fires, but also civil liability payouts, which have been huge for the last 2 years, setting some big records. What are some ways that you've thought about where we can cap this or get this under control?
Well, it actually goes back to our earlier conversation of the city infrastructure. If you look at one of the largest categories for liabilities for lawsuits, it slips and falls from broken sidewalks, from other parts of the city infrastructure that cause damage or injury to individuals. We need to repair our infrastructure, but I just don't, I'm not sure that elected officials can get the job done. Everybody's term limited. We need to have an independent authority that manages repairing the city's infrastructure.
Just to have you for a brief moment left, speaking of lawsuits, there was a legal action filed against you, as you know, from former LA Fire Chief Kristen Crowley. I understand there's not much you can talk about pending litigation, but what do you want people to understand about her claims that you have in some way defamed her and shifted the blame onto her after what we saw with the fire?
Well, you are correct. I can't go into details, but what I can say is that I have said nothing about the chief that has not been widely reported. Investigative reports in the Washington Post, New York Times, and LA Times.
With the Olympics coming up, this is something we're thinking about a lot with the minimum wage, $30 minimum wage, and also now these warring ballot propositions where Unite Here Local 11 is coming forward with a ballot proposition to take on the hotels and the airlines who are saying we're trying to repeal the $30 minimum wage. People say this is something about LA City government, that we can't go to government to get this done. We have to go straight to the ballot.
Absolutely, and I think that that is unfortunate, and we're going to try to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. So talking to both sides, bringing people together, and having those conversations, I think, is critically important. But you know, the role of the city council, the mayor's office, and working independently with individuals to make sure that we can have an outcome that is better, because in just 11 short months, we will have the World Cup here. We don't need to be at war with ourselves while the world is ready to come here. We need to get our city ready.
That's right. And we got to go Team USA for the World Cup. But the Olympics come after that. There's so much to discuss on that. This has been such a great conversation with you, Mayor. Hope we can do this more.
Absolutely. I'd like to.
Thank you so much for coming in. Mayor Karen Bass talking a bit about what we're seeing here in Los Angeles and, of course, the way that ripples out to the rest of the nation and thereby the world.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage. And click the subscribe button here. You can also download our app and watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.